Welcome ladies and gents, I've just returned from a really eventful week in the south of Spain fishing the Iberian Masters event. Now the Iberian Masters for us was a feeder only event. It was fished to World Championships rules and it was on a river called the River Juper, right near Valencia, and we'd heard about this event for quite a while now where anglers were catching big bags of carp and carasio, and we really fancied giving it a go. My travelling partner was Phil Ringer and the first job was to sort out how we're actually going to get there. We thought we could either fly, which was going to be the fastest route there, but we needed to get a kit out there somehow, and that meant sending it on a courier. Or we could drive all the way, which was a 24-hour drive. Again, really tiring, but it meant that we actually got there with our kit. Or we could catch the ferry from Portsmouth to Santander, which is north Spain, and then drive the rest of the way. And that's what we actually decided to do. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it was the more relaxing way of doing things, and it actually got us there probably in a similar amount of time as driving. The ferry's an overnight ferry, it's 24 hours, and then we had a 7-hour drive on the other side in Spain. So the first job was to get around Phil's at 3:30 in the morning, load his van up, and then we were on our way. We arrived at the ferry port, full of excitement at 8 in the morning. We got on the ferry and it was a really smooth ride. Fantastic cabins on the ferry, nice and relaxing. And we'd left behind a really freezing cold UK. And we arrived in Spain, I'm pleased to say, to bright sun and fantastic views. And all we had to do then, and I say all we had to do, was drive the 7 hours to the venue and get a good night's sleep in the hotel. On arriving to the hotel, you could tell that the event was going to be run really well. The organisation was fantastic. The hotel was really nice, and the organisers met us on the evening and talked us through how the event was going to be run. And you could just tell that everything was going to run really smoothly. The format for the event was 3 days, the sections of 12 or 13, depending on obviously which section you drew, and the event was going to be run on points. We were told that the river, there was plenty of carp, some carasio to be caught, and a lot of the fishing revolved around sticky maggots in a cage feeder and casting over to the far side. That suited us down to the ground. We love catching carp, and we felt that it was going to be a venue where you could actually attack it and feed quite aggressively. After a good night's sleep, Monday morning, we decided to have a practice session. The other two guys that had come with us, Steve and Joe Wielden, father and son. Steve, who we call the big hitter for obvious reasons because he's massive. And Joe was the housewife's favourite because he's a good looking young lad. We decided to go and sit for our practice session on the Monday in the middle of the match length. Everything was running fantastically. I set up all my kit just as normal, had a bit of a chat while we were setting up, and then this man turned up. He'd got Garda written all over his top, and we straight away realised he was some sort of local bailiff, police, constable, something like that. He was ranting and raving, and we got the gist of it eventually. No fishing on this venue on a Monday. Apparently it's some sort of Spanish bylaw that there's no fishing allowed on this particular venue on a Monday. We couldn't understand it. We'd been told that we could fish by the organisation as long as we didn't put keep nets in, but this bloke was having none of it. It took us maybe half an hour or 40 minutes, several phone calls. Obviously the language barrier is quite difficult, and in the end it became quite a joke between us all really, even this chap. And he was adamant we weren't allowed to fish. 5 minutes after this chap had left us, the proper police turned up. The white van, red stripe down the side, police officer all geared up with all his weapons, turned up and said, lads, if you're not going to get your kit off the bank, I'm going to confiscate it. Now obviously now we knew it was a little bit serious, we had to stop fishing. Fortunately, we'd made a contact in the local tackle shop, and Jose arrived to take us to another venue just off the match length the same part of the river, but probably half a mile away, where we could actually get some fishing done. Now, this part of the river wasn't as easy accessible. We had to climb a ladder down to the bank, and I didn't fancy taking my kit down there. So it was just a nice leisurely afternoon for me, sitting on a net bag, using my rod bag as a rod rest, and just chucking out a bit of ground bait just to get a feel for the venue. And eventually, probably after 2 hours, I caught my first fish, a small carasio. And all four of us really struggled, to be fair. It just illustrated how difficult the fishing was going to be over the next few days. Day 2's practice session didn't run quite as smoothly either. It absolutely peed it down all day. We got soaked through, and all four of us stopped fishing at about 1:30, 2 in the afternoon. It wasn't very comfortable at all, and we struggled, to be fair. We fished on the match length this time, and we caught between 2 and 4 fish each. All carp, no carasio this time, which is a bit strange. We caught some carasio off the match length, but it was all carp. So now at least we're getting a feel for the venue and realising that, firstly, there weren't many carasio in the venue on the match length, and the fishing was going to be pretty tough. Days 3 and 4 actually went quite well, practice-wise. We sat to the right of the bridge, and we caught some fish. Now, big Steve Weldon, he'd been catching a few fish during practice. He'd been sitting on the end peg, which threw us a little bit off the scent, but he was fishing bigger feeders, casting quite regular, being quite aggressive actually with his feeding, which went against what we'd been told about the venue. Now, I'd settled on a plan. I'd caught a few fish, and what I wanted to do on the match day was fish sticky maggot feeder across, and then either worms in ground bait or lean down the middle. Now, preparing sticky mag is really easy. I know some people get a little bit confused with it all. For me, it's a simple case of riddling all of the maize, all of the sawdust off of your maggots. You need really clean maggots for the sticky mag powder to work. So as soon as you get to your peg, you need to riddle all of that off of your maggots. Place them into a nice big bowl, and then I wet my hand in a bucket of water, run my hand through the maggots. When you pull it out, your hand will be covered in dust. Wipe that dust off, repeat the process. Keep dipping your hand in the water, running your hand through the maggots. That not only cleans the maggots, it also slightly dampens them. Then you just spray on your sticky mag powder. It's marketed as sticky mag powder or Arabic gum. Quite a few manufacturers supply it, and you just squirt on quite a bit of the powder, depending on how sticky you want the maggots. Now, big thing for me when I'm feeder fishing with sticky maggots is that the breakdown rate needs to be right. And because we were waiting quite a while for bites, I wanted the breakdown rate to be quite slow. So I sprayed on quite a bit of powder on each day to make sure that those maggots broke down nice and slowly in the feeder. Talking about feeders, there was 2 feeders that we used when we were out in Spain. The first one was the most common one that I've seen a lot of anglers using, and this seems to work really well with sticky mags, is the distance feeder with the lead round the bottom. Now, for some reason, this just works. I can't tell you why, it just does, and I'm pretty sure it's because the lead round the base helps keep the maggots in for a little bit longer, and it controls the speed that the maggots break down, so they break down nice and slowly in the feeder, which obviously makes your hook bait stand out a little bit more because it's the only maggots that's outside of your feeder. The next feeder that we used was this little Nisa bullet. We call it the pocket rocket. It makes hardly a noise when it goes in. A little plop over the far side. It was great for just nicking a fish when you didn't want loads of bait. It was almost like chucking a little bomb with just a few maggots inside, just a few sticky maggots inside, and you could either fill that with maggots or ground bait or a bit of both if you wanted to. But those were the 2 styles of feeders that we used. Mixing the ground bait, again, did that as soon as we got to a peg. We used a local ground bait that our friend, our Italian stallion that we called him, that we met on the first day, he put us onto. It was a really sweet smelling ground bait, quite fine, and sort of yellow in colour. And actually looking around at a lot of the Spanish guys, they were using a similar ground bait, so we weren't far off the mark there. So I'd got a few things on my bait tray: sticky maggots, some lean straight out the bag and through a riddle, and some ground bait. 3 things that I can put through my feeder. So I felt like I'd got enough variety there to actually catch a few fish. The buzz at the draw for the day one of the event was brilliant. The Spanish really do things right when it comes to these big events. A specialist building where they do all the draws for this venue, flags outside, really professionally done, lanyards with your picture on and your peg number on, top class. So everyone was well up for it. My draw put me in D section. Now, we felt that D was going to be the hardest section out of the lot, and my draw in the middle of D section, bang in the middle, wasn't ideal. We felt that you needed either end really, and it went on to be proved that way. I managed one Carasio about 2 hours into the match, which got me off the mark, and as the day went on, I really feared the worst. Either end of the section were catching quite a few fish, and I needed snookers really. With half hour to go, I picked up the big baiting up feeder and I put in a load of hempen corn, a line just 15 metres out from the bank. We knew that the odd fish can be caught later in the year this close to the bank, but with the temperatures still being a little bit on the cool side for Spain, we weren't sure whether it was going to work. Now, just 5 minutes after putting about 1.5 pints of bait in at 15 metres, I chucked on it, and with 5 minutes to go, I hooked a fish. My first carp of the day. I played it nice and carefully, took my time. There was a weed bed just to my right, and all I could think about is I needed this fish to come out. And with just literally seconds of the match remaining, I netted the fish. In World Championship rules, you have to have the fish out of the water when the hooter goes, and I think I just about managed that. So that got me out of jail really. I finished 7th in the section on that day, on that first day, which wasn't a total disaster, but it needed to be better for days 2 and 3. Day 2 arrived, and would you believe it, me and Phil drew next to each other. Phil had a pretty good day on the first day. He'd finished 2nd in his section, so we've all got high hopes of doing well in the competition. We'd spent all that time travelling, we'd spent all that time in the same room as each other, and now we've drew next to each other. We were in B section, and again, somewhere we felt wasn't a great area. If you drew B section, ideally you need to drew the higher numbers, and we drew low in B section. Set up all the kit as normal. Philip was fishing slightly different to me, and with 3 hours of the match gone, we were staring a blank full in the face. Neither of us had had a fish, and the higher numbers of D were catching plenty of fish. Amazingly, the South African on my right hand side had 5 bites by now, 5 fish in the net, and we just couldn't believe that we were doing it that wrong for that situation to happen. I'd not had a bite, Phil had 1 bite and lost it, and we were well off the pace. And then with an hour to go, I finally get my bite, and it snagged me in the rocks straight away. And that was the only action that me and Phil had that day. We both blanked. We were in good company. That evening we found out that Italian internationals had blanked, a French international had blanked. So it just illustrated the patchy nature of the venue. And we knew we had to have a little bit of a rethink, not with necessarily the baits and the way that we were fishing, but the lines that we were fishing and how long we were leaving the feeder in and how aggressively we were attacking the peg just for day 3. And day 3 for us was all about salvaging a little bit of pride and maybe winning a bit of money on the final day for the trip home. So day 3 of the competition arrives. Morale was a little bit hit because of the previous day's antics, but we went to our pegs with renewed enthusiasm, hoping to win a little bit of money on the day for our trip home. Now, it was all about salvaging a bit of pride. So when I went into the bag and I drew in B section, just a couple of pegs away from where I drew the day before and blanked, obviously I wasn't in the best of moods. The only thing I'd got a bit of experience of this area from the previous day. So on getting to my peg, I decided to spend a little bit more time down the middle of the river. That's where a few fish had been hooked or had been caught the day before. The far bank hadn't been great. So decided at the start I was going to feed quite heavy down the middle, so that way I knew that when I did drop on it there was going to be some bait there for me to fish over the top of. Lehman worms was my choice. Used a big baiting up feeder. I put in quite a bit of bait at the start there, chopped up some worms. I felt that the worms were going to give me a good chance of catching anything, a Carasio, a carp, whether it be a big carp or a small carp. And There was an argument to say I could have used sweet corn and hemp maybe and fished for big fish, but I felt that was too much of a go for broke tactic. Across was going to be purely sticky mag. The guys that were catching on sticky mag, so I just knew that I maybe needed to alter my approach slightly. I felt that I was casting a little bit too frequently, and on the final day I decided to leave it in the water for a little bit longer. As the day went on, 2 hours in, I got a phone call from Lee Kerry, who was further down in the section. He was towards the high numbers of B section. He was blanking, I was blanking, nearly all of the section was blanking. It was a really tough day. And then out of the blue, as I'm on the phone to him, the tip's gone round. I was down the middle at this point, a tiny bit of worm on the hook, the tip's gone round, dropped the phone and playing my first fish of the day. Turned out to be a fish of about 1 kilo. Beautiful fish, obviously these Spanish carp, fight like stink, and I was well chuffed to be off the mark, considering the section was fishing so hard as well. Half an hour later, same things happened, another fish down the middle. This is a brilliant middle period of the match. I cannot tell you how hard the venue was fishing. So I felt it set me up for a good last hour. Unfortunately, last hour I managed just one fish. I had a spell of 4 casts where I had indications on the far bank, fishing that sticky mag feeder, 3 maggots on the hook, and I had 4 indications. 2 little tiny line bites, 1 that I thought was actually a proper bite, and 1 fish that pulled the rod round, and obviously I caught him fishing the net. My 3 fish went just under 6 kilo, and it got me, I'd say, respectable points in the section. Nowhere near good enough to finish anywhere in the festival, but at least on the final day I caught a few fish and learnt a few things for the next time we go to the Iberian Masters. The presentation, as with the whole event, ran really smoothly. We were driving home rather than sailing, so we needed a good night's sleep that night. We clapped the winners, then went back to the room for a good kip, ready for the 24-hour drive home. Thanks for watching. I'll leave you now with Miguel Rosello, the eventual winner, going up to collect his winnings. Hopefully I'll be back soon, and hopefully the results will be slightly different. I'll see you soon.
2018, Miguel Rosello.